A simple woman mocked by the snobbish elite, just because of her plain beige dress and quiet presence. Whispers followed her like shadows. She doesn't belong here. Probably crashed the event. They laughed, pointed, and judged her, without mercy. But what they didn't know was that she wasn't just another guest. She was the reason the entire event existed. And when her true identity was revealed, the room froze. Because the woman they ridiculed was 100 times richer, and far more powerful, than all of them combined. Crystal chandeliers shimmered from the high ceiling, casting golden reflections onto the marble floor below, where designer heels glided as if the entire room had been built solely for the elite. At the Lancaster Hotel, the jewel of upscale Boston, a grand charity gala was underway, where jeweled gowns and carefully rehearsed smiles mingled with flutes of chilled champagne. Among the sea of glittering guests, Alina Moreau, 34, stepped inside with a grace so quiet it seemed almost out of place. She wore a pale beige dress, soft in texture, unadorned by lace or rhinestones, and bearing no label from any luxury house. Her chestnut hair fell gently to the nape of her neck, and her worn ballet flats suggested someone headed for a job interview. More than a $5,000 a plate gala. Across the ballroom, 3 women turned toward each other. Clarice Vanderbilt, 45, a longtime coordinator of the hospital foundation, cast her gaze toward Alina as if she'd spotted a stain on an otherwise pristine tablecloth. "Who on earth sent her an invitation?" she whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Beside her, Vanessa Ellington, 43, raised her wine glass to her lips, hiding a smirk beneath the rim. Maybe she's part of the organizing staff. Looks like someone who forgot to change out of their uniform. Or a model for the hospital's brochures. Marilyn Chen, 39, added, half joking, though her eyes scanned every wrinkle in Alina's, dressed like a laser. Despite the cold stares aimed her way, Alina walked with quiet composure. She stopped in front of the architectural renderings for the pediatric oncology wing, the focus of tonight's fundraiser. What no one in the room knew was that earlier that morning, Alina had spent hours visiting children in the hospital, reading to them, learning their names, and promising a little girl named Sophie that the new garden would be filled with butterflies, so she could watch spring arrive even from her hospital window. "Excuse me, have we met?" A voice, soft yet clear, sounded beside her. Clarice had approached, her smile polished but her eyes still assessing. "I'm Clarice Vanderbilt, co-chair of this evening's gala." "A pleasure to meet you," Alina smiled. "I'm Alina." "Moreau." Clarice narrowed her eyes. The name Moreau didn't ring any bells in her mental Rolodex of Boston's upper crust. "So you work at the hospital? A doctor, perhaps? Or a nurse?" "Not quite," Alina replied calmly. "I just care deeply about children's health." Clarice gave a soft chuckle, lightly patting Alina's arm as if consoling her. "It's sweet when ordinary folks start getting involved in the big things." Vanessa leaned in, her voice as sharp as crystal under a silk napkin. "Tonight's about raising millions. Small contributions are sweet, of course, but small drops still fill the ocean," Alina replied gently. "I believe that." Clarice glanced again at the beige dress. "That gown, is it vintage?" Alina nodded. "Just something simple. I find ornate designs distract from what matters." "How practical," Clarice replied, the word laced with condescension. "You must meet Mr. Montague Wells, last year's top donor. He has a soft spot for everyday people." They began guiding Alina across the ballroom. Along the way, Clarice subtly signaled to friends. Some raised eyebrows, others smirked, and whispers trailed behind them. "Who is she?" "Looks like she bought that dress off a clearance rack." She must have wandered in from housekeeping, but then a familiar voice sliced through the murmurs. "Ms. Moreau? I didn't know you'd be attending tonight." It was Dr. Lawrence Hale, chief of pediatrics, his face lit with sincere delight. "The kids are still talking about your butterfly garden. Promise." Clarice stiffened, lips parting slightly in surprise. "You know each other?" Dr. Hale nodded, his eyes still glowing. "She visited our ward this morning. asked thoughtful questions about our pediatric care model. We were all impressed. Marilyn laughed lightly, trying to sound gracious. Oh, I assume she came for the hors d'oeuvres. Dr. Hale shot her a cool glance. Actually, Ms. Moreau has a remarkable understanding of hospital operations. I'd love to hear more from her. Clarice's smile froze, just barely. Of course, but let's not overwhelm her. New guests often aren't used to how things work here. Alina simply smiled, saying nothing. Across the room, the stage lights began to brighten. The hospital director stepped onto the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, we are moments away from revealing the top donors of this year's pediatric expansion project. Clarice leaned toward her friends and whispered, "This is where we shine." Alina glanced at her watch. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I need to step out for a moment." Clarice exhaled, clearly relieved. "Restrooms are down the hall. To the left, though I doubt they can help much with that dress." Alina smiled, nodded politely, and turned away. The light from the chandeliers traced her figure as she walked, soft and graceful like a passing breeze. No one in that room realized that in less than 10 minutes that same figure would turn their world upside down. Alina returned to the ballroom just as the spotlight illuminated the stage, where the hospital director, Mr. Richard Leland, stood poised at the microphone. As the murmurs of the crowd softened, his deep, steady voice broke through the perfumed air with weight and authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is more than just a gala. It is a historic moment. For the first time in its 150-year history, Boston Children's Hospital has received a donation that no one could have predicted." The entire ballroom seemed to tighten with anticipation. Clarice furrowed her brows. She knew the donor list by heart, and none of them had been labeled unexpected. Richard continued, "An anonymous benefactor has pledged $25 million with only one request, that the west garden of the new wing be named Sophie's Butterfly Haven, after a young patient currently undergoing treatment." A wave of whispers rippled across the room, only to be silenced by his next words. "And tonight, at the donor's request, we have the privilege of revealing the identity of the person who has just changed the future of this hospital." His voice deepened with significance as he looked out across the room. "Please welcome Ms. Alina Moreau." That single sentence seemed to vacuum the air from the ballroom. Clarice's wineglass froze mid-air, her eyes wide. Marilyn clutched her evening clutch tightly, and Vanessa stood absolutely still. There must be another. "Alina," Clarice stammered under her breath. But no, Alina was already moving. She walked calmly toward the stage, the same beige dress that had drawn quiet mockery now transforming under the lights into something effortlessly elegant. Each step she took seemed to part the crowd, not with force, but with presence. As whispers gave way to stunned silence, then awe. On stage, the lights didn't expose her. They crowned her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Leland said once the room had quieted, "allow me to introduce the founder of the Moreau Foundation for Pediatric Medical Research, the woman who has made the largest single contribution in our hospital's history." Applause began hesitantly, then grew, then erupted. Alina stepped up to the microphone, her gaze gentle yet unwavering. "When I was 12, she began, "I spent 9 months in this very hospital being treated for leukemia. The people here didn't just heal my body, they healed my spirit. They gave me something I never thought I'd have again. A future." Not a single sound stirred. The room was gripped in absolute stillness. Clarice felt something tighten in her throat. "Now," Alina continued, "I simply want to give that same chance to other children. My foundation will continue to fund cutting-edge research, and more importantly, to create spaces of healing, where kids can rediscover who they are in the midst of their battles." From below the stage, Dr. Hale's eyes glistened. "Such a simple speech," he whispered to no one in particular, "and yet it touches every heart." Clarice couldn't speak. Her thoughts echoed with the voice from less than an hour ago. Maybe. She's one of the catering staff. And now every donor in the room was looking up at this woman. After the speech, Mr. Leland invited guests to view the architectural renderings, Alina descended the stage, and this time every pair of eyes followed her with something entirely different: admiration and curiosity. "Is she really a Moreau?" one woman gasped. "As in, the family that founded the global medical imaging systems?" Clarice stood frozen. Marilyn whispered, "She inherited everything when her parents died in that plane crash at 25. So she's been quietly funding pediatric care for over a decade. And no one knew?" Vanessa stared at Alina, her expression hollow. "And we mocked her dress." Surrounded now by a respectful circle of donors and board members, Alina had become the nucleus of the room. And for the first time in her life, Clarice felt truly out of place, adrift in a sea of glitter and pretense, while the only gravity in the room came from compassion. Dr. Hale made his way to Alina, grinning. "Wish I could have seen the look on their faces when you walked up there," he teased. Alina laughed softly. "I didn't do this to make a point, James, but I won't pretend. Sometimes surprise is a lesson." He chuckled. 25 million lessons, perhaps. Together they turned to face the butterfly garden renderings. Alina leaned closer, voice low but full of meaning. "Some promises are meant to be kept, especially to an 8-year-old girl who believes butterflies carry wishes." Not far away, Clarice stood gripping her clutch like it was the only thing keeping her from unraveling completely. Her composure, her pride, her carefully maintained image, all suddenly felt paper thin. She knew in that moment she would have to face something she'd spent her entire adult life avoiding: the truth about herself. The ballroom now felt like an impromptu reunion of people who had once brushed past each other with haughty glances, but were now all smiles, eager to strike up a conversation with the modest woman who had just made history. Alina had become a new center of gravity, quiet yet powerful, drawing every gaze, every question, and every ounce of admiration. Clarice stood on the sidelines. No one asked her anymore which auction she was planning next, or which cause the Vanderbilt name would be backing this season. Her heart beat unevenly, part shame, part unfamiliarity, and part something she couldn't deny: deep emotion. Alina stood alone before the rendering of Sophie's Butterfly Haven, a garden soon to be filled with butterfly-friendly flowers, wide paths for wheelchairs, and sunlit awnings for children too fragile to step into the daylight. Clarice took a deep breath, bracing herself, then walked over. "Ms. Moreau," she began, voice low but clear. Alina turned. There was no reproach in her eyes, only a calm attention that made Clarice feel as exposed as a schoolgirl called. "To the front of the class. It's truly an enormous surprise," Clarice said, trying to steady her voice. "If only we'd known about your work, about the Moreau Foundation." "But you weren't meant to know," Alina interrupted gently, her tone devoid of any edge. It was like looking into a mirror. "That's exactly the point, isn't it?" Clarice paused, caught off guard. I don't even know what to say. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," Alina said, her voice so steady it struck like a soft but undeniable blow. "You and your friends saw me as someone unworthy of your attention, and everything that followed came from that one assumption." Clarice's chest tightened. "I treated you terribly." Alina didn't deny it. She didn't console her either. She simply smiled, not the kind that soothes, but the kind born from someone who had already seen too much and no longer needed to explain herself. "The question," Alina said calmly, "is not what you did, but what you'll do with it now." Clarice had never felt so small, not because of Alina's wealth or status, but because of her quiet strength, a strength that needed no voice, no validation, and that left Clarice feeling painfully hollow. Up on the stage, Director Leland began unveiling the names engraved on the donor wall. Clarice knew hers would be there somewhere in the middle tier, but where Alina's name should have stood at the very top, a simple inscription glimmered in gold: "In honor of Sophie and all children bravely fighting illness, our greatest inspiration for compassion." The entire ballroom fell silent. "She declined the recognition," someone whispered. "She gave 25 million. and still chose to remain anonymous. Clarice turned to Alina, unable to hide the disbelief in her eyes. Why? Didn't you want your name up there? Alina gazed at the inscription as if reading the very reason she existed. Because it's not about who I am, she said softly. It's about giving those children one more day to live, one more spring to see, one more butterfly to chase, and maybe one more moment to look in the mirror without fear. Clarice stood motionless. The words sank into her like water, into parched ground, slowly breaking through the hardened surface of decades spent performing charity without ever understanding what it meant. You showed me something I've needed to see for a long time, Clarice whispered. Not through words, but by how you live. Alina nodded gently. We all need reminders, Clarice, myself included. The donor wall shimmered quietly beneath the lights. Guests began drifting toward the design display, but Clarice no longer felt the urgency to move. She stood there beside Alina, no longer the hostess, no longer the symbol of high society, just a woman beginning to see with new eyes, learning to step out from behind the mask she'd worn for years. And at a quiet corner behind the stage, little Sophie, her hair thin from chemo, was standing beside her mother, gazing at the garden plans. The girl beamed, pointing to a row of purple blooms. That spot. That's where I want to sit first, she whispered. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the newly built treatment wing. Sophie's butterfly haven was no longer just an architectural rendering. It had become a real paradise. Vibrant flower beds, small shaded, gazebos and wide stone paths where wheelchairs could glide effortlessly. Real butterflies had returned, resting on purple daisies, cosmos, and even on tiny outstretched hands. Alina gently pushed Sophie's wheelchair. The girl was visibly healthier now, her cheeks flushed pink after a successful round of treatment. She stopped when she saw a butterfly stretching its orange and black wings atop a golden daisy. Miss Alina, look, Sophie whispered. It's just like me, isn't it? I'm learning how to fly again, too. Alina bent down, her hand gently resting on Sophie's shoulder. You're not just learning to fly, sweetheart. You're teaching the rest of us how to hope. Hospital courtyard was filling quickly. Today marked the official inauguration of the new treatment wing, specifically designed for pediatric oncology, equipped with the latest technology and open-air spaces to help children reconnect with nature. But most importantly, it was a place born out of belief. The belief of someone who had once been a patient, now turned into a creator of hope for a new generation. Clarice had arrived early. Unlike past events, she wasn't dressed in sequins or high heels. Today she wore a simple olive dress, her hair in a soft bun, and makeup just enough to be respectful. She was helping nurses arrange chairs for the children's choir, young patients in recovery, who would be opening the ceremony with a rendition of You Raise Me Up. Alina spotted her and smiled. Clarice no longer stood at the center of elite circles. She now stood among children, kneeling to tie a little boy's shoe, then wiping the nose of a curly-haired girl with a tissue. 6 months may be short in a lifetime, but for Clarice, they were the most honest days she had lived. In years, she had left behind 3 social committees known for little more than cocktail parties, choosing instead to devote her time to raising funds for emotional support programs for families with long-term hospitalized children. She was no longer featured on society pages. She was now a regular in hospital waiting rooms, where people needed far more than clever conversation. They needed a hand to hold. Clarice, Alina called gently, walking up beside her. Is the choir ready? Almost. Clarice turned, eyes shining. Your little girl has a big voice, you know. Sophie sings like she wants butterflies to hear her from the other side of the mountain. They both laughed. There was no trace left of the divide that had once separated them. Only 2 women standing side by side, caring for a generation fighting with everything they had. My husband thinks I've lost my mind, Clarice said with a wry smile. Last week he asked when I'd return to the country club committee. I told him, Maybe after we've raised enough for the new sibling rest area. Alina chuckled and nodded in admiration. Clarice, you've gone further than I imagined. No, Clarice said, glancing towards Sophie, who was waving to a friend beside her. I've only just begun. A young nurse called Alina and Sophie to the ribbon-cutting spot. Clarice waved them on. Moments later, the ceremony began, attended by hospital staff, the media, donors, and families. Sophie, along with 3 other children, held scissors together and cut the red ribbon. In that moment, no spotlight shone brighter than the smiles on their faces. Clarice stood beside Alina as applause echoed around them. When the ceremony ended, they walked together toward the butterfly garden. There's something I want you to know, Clarice said, her voice lowering. I started a small scholarship fund. It's nothing like yours, but it'll help a few parents buy medication or take time off work to care for their kids. Alina turned toward her, a smile lighting up her eyes. Clarice, that's not small. That might be the biggest thing. You didn't just change your view. You changed your heart. Clarice nodded, feeling for the first time a peace that her old social prestige had never given her. You gave me a wake-up call, one I didn't know I needed. We all need those moments, Alina said. The real question is, do we have the courage to listen when they come? In the distance, Sophie bent down near a purple bloom, her hand trembling slightly as a bright orange butterfly landed softly on her fingertip. Miss Clarice, Sophie called out. Do you see? It picked me. Clarice raised a hand to shield, her eyes from the sun, and smiled, radiant. I see it, sweetheart, I see it clearly. The sun dipped low at the edge of the garden, casting soft golden streaks across a scene that was both lively and serene. Butterflies still fluttered gently over the flower beds. Inside the new treatment wing, children's laughter echoed between the quiet hum of wheelchair wheels rolling across stone floors and the soft steps of doctors and nurses passing by. It was a world both real and magical, a place where hope wasn't abstract, but something nurtured and planted each day. Alina stood by the white wooden railing that bordered the garden path, her hand resting lightly on the banister. She wore nothing extravagant, just a pale gray linen dress, her hair tousled gently by the breeze, framing her face with calm grace. Her eyes followed little Sophie, who was now leading a group of children with the help of a nurse, showing them how to care for the butterflies. None of the kids knew who Alina was in the way adults cared to know. To them, she was simply Miss Alina, the lady who brought butterflies to the hospital. Clarice stepped beside her. No invitation, no pretense, just 2 women standing, side by side as they had done many times before. We did it, Clarice whispered. Alina tilted her head slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. We've only just begun. There was a quiet pause. Clarice smoothed the hem of her sleeve, then turned, her expression shifting into something more serious. Alina, she said, I owe you more than thanks, not just for the garden or the donation, but for what you helped me see. The mirror you held up to me, one I'd refused to look into for years. Alina looked at her, sunlight filtering through the trees, glinting in their eyes like water. We're all taught how to measure success, she replied softly. But almost no one teaches us how to recognize true worth, in others or in ourselves. Clarice nodded. I used to think humility was a kind of weakness. Now, I think it's courage. You came to that gala in an unbranded dress, and none of us had the courage to recognize the greatness standing right in front of us. And yet you changed, Alina said gently but with conviction. Not everyone does. Clarice smiled faintly, her eyes shimmering. Do you know what truly changed me? Not the money. It was Sophie, her eyes, when you promised there would be butterflies outside her window. Eyes like that, they don't lie. Alina looked out toward Sophie, who was now helping another child learn how to photograph a butterfly with a phone. I used to be one of those kids, she said, and if I survived just to exist without giving back, then survival would have meant nothing. In the distance, Director Leland was motioning to Alina, gesturing toward a group of visiting physicians from another hospital, but she shook her head gently. Not today. Not now. She had already done what she came to do. "Clarice," Alina said, "I won't be staying much longer. The garden is complete, the programs are running. I think it's time for me to step back a little." Clarice looked surprised. "Where will you go?" "There's a small hospital up in Maine," Alina replied. "They're trying to rebuild. Their pediatric wing. I'll spend some time there." Clarice didn't ask more, she simply nodded. "Will you come back?" she asked softly. Alina smiled. "There's no need to return. What needed to be planted has already taken root. Now it's time for others to tend it." Sophie came running over, holding a colorful paper butterfly she had folded herself. "Miss Alina, I made this for you, so you can take it with you if you go far away." Alina knelt down, accepting the small gift with hands that trembled just a little. "Thank you, sweetheart. This will go everywhere with me." Sophie stood on her tiptoes and gave Alina a big, tight hug. Clarice turned away, quietly wiping the corner of her eye. An hour later, as the crowd began to thin and the day wound down, Alina slipped away, just as quietly as she had stepped into their lives. No farewell music, no grand speech, just a woman in a simple dress, walking out the gates of a garden she had built with tenderness and unshakable will. Weeks later, in the hospital hallway, a young mother sat holding her child, waiting for test results. Clarice walked up and sat beside them. No titles, no name tags, just a warm cup of tea and an even warmer look in her eyes. She was no longer Clarice Vanderbilt, the charity gala woman, but someone who walked beside others. Change doesn't come overnight, but it always begins with a moment, a beige dress, a quiet smile, and a promise to a child that butterflies would come, because when we stop judging by appearances, miracles begin to bloom, softly, quietly, like butterfly wings, after the rain, before the lights fade and the butterflies rest. If you believe that true worth isn't worn, it's lived, we invite you to stay just a little longer. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd be honored to have your quiet strength join ours. Tap subscribe and turn on the bell. Because every day we share stories that remind us there's power in walking humbly. There's truth beneath what others overlook. And sometimes, the most extraordinary people are the ones no one saw coming.